I still remember that night like it was yesterday. Rain slammed against the windows, wind howled, and I stood in my tiny kitchen holding my son's birthday cake, proud and a little tired. I thought I was going to his house to celebrate the boy I raised, the man I believed still loved his mother. I did not know I was walking into a storm far colder than the weather outside. Before I tell you what my son did to me that night, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me from where you are watching right now, my friends. I started that morning like any other birthday morning for my son. I woke up early, put on my old sweater, and stood in my little kitchen mixing the batter for his favorite chocolate cake. I still use the same recipe I made when he was a little boy, the one he used to lick off the spoon and tell me I was the best mother in the world. As I stirred the mixture, I remembered those small hands, those soft smiles, and those birthdays when he would run into my arms. Those memories gave me strength. They made me believe we were still a family, even though things had changed since he married into a richer, louder family. Still, I told myself that tonight, maybe, he would hug me like before. After baking the cake, I wrapped the small gift I bought him. It wasn't anything expensive because I live on a simple income, but it was something thoughtful, a framed photo of us at the park, taken when he was 9. I had kept that picture safe for all these years. I wrapped it gently, smoothing the paper and placing a little bow on top. I believed he would smile when he saw it. I believed he would remember who I was to him. The weather forecast said rain, but I didn't think much about it. I grabbed my warmest coat, a scarf, and a bag with the cake and gift inside. As I stepped outside, the first drops of rain hit my cheeks, cold and sharp. I pulled the coat tighter and walked toward the bus stop. My son lived only 15 minutes away, but the buses were slow and the wind was picking up. Still, nothing stopped me. It was his birthday. I wanted to be there early to help set the table, maybe warm the food, maybe talk to him before the others arrived. On the bus ride, I imagined the night ahead. I pictured him opening the door, surprised and happy. I pictured his smile, maybe a warm hug, maybe thanking me for the cake I always made. I pictured sitting together like old times, even if only for a few moments. These simple thoughts kept me warm as the rain grew stronger outside. I didn't expect luxury, I didn't expect special treatment, and I didn't expect gifts in return. I only expected kindness. I expected the basic respect a mother deserves from her own child. When the bus dropped me off near his street, the storm was already building. The wind hit me so hard I had to hold my scarf in place. The rain soaked my coat in minutes. I hurried as fast as my legs allowed, clutching the cake tightly so it wouldn't fall. His house was glowing with warm lights through the windows. I could see silhouettes moving inside, people talking, laughing, raising their glasses. Cars lined the driveway. His in-laws were already there, dressed nicely, sheltered, warm and dry. Still, I smiled. I told myself it didn't matter how fancy they were. I was his mother, and I had every right to be there. I walked up the steps slowly, trying not to slip on the wet wood. My hair was damp, my coat heavy with water, but I didn't care. I knocked once softly, then again a little louder. For a moment, no one answered, but I could hear music and voices inside, so I knew they heard me. I waited. I told myself maybe they were busy. Maybe he didn't hear. Maybe they would open the door soon. I wiped my wet hands on my coat and held the cake steady. I whispered to myself, "It's okay. Stay calm. This is a happy day." I believed that. I believed my son still had space for me in his heart. I believed that he would open the door and say, "Mom, come in. You're soaked. Let me help you." But as I stood there in the growing storm, soaked to the skin, holding a homemade cake and a gift from my heart, I had no idea that everything I had hoped for was about to shatter. I had no idea that behind that door, the boy I raised had already made a choice that would break me in a way I never expected. I had no idea I was not walking toward a celebration. I was walking toward betrayal, and nothing, not the rain, not the darkness, not the cold, could prepare me for the moment he would show me exactly what I meant to him now. When the door finally opened, it wasn't my son who answered. It was his wife's mother, standing tall in her expensive dress, holding a glass of champagne like she owned the house. She looked at me from head to toe, my wet coat, my messy hair, the cake box in my hands, and her smile faded before it even formed. She pulled the door closer to her body, leaving only a small gap, as if she didn't want Rain or someone like me to get inside. Behind her, I could see the dining room glowing with fancy lights, the table decorated with tall candles, silver cutlery, and plates that looked more like museum pieces than dishes for food. Everyone inside was dressed like they were attending a high-end gala, not a family birthday dinner. When she finally stepped aside, it was not out of politeness. It was out of irritation. Her eyes narrowed, and she whispered sharply over her shoulder toward my son's wife, "Oh, she came." Those 3 words stabbed more than the rain outside. They made it clear that my presence was not part of the plan. I stepped inside slowly, hoping maybe my son would appear and give me a smile, just a small one, to let me know I belonged. But instead, as I walked into the living room, the entire group fell silent.
All eyes turned to me.
Elegant dresses, polished shoes, perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect posture. And then there was me, wet, tired, holding a cake box wrapped with cheap ribbon, wearing shoes soaked through from the storm. I saw judgment on every face. Not one person offered to take my coat. Not one asked if I needed a towel. Not one said, "Happy birthday to your son." They just stared at me as if I had crashed a party meant for people better than me. My son appeared from the kitchen, holding a glass of wine, laughing with his in-laws. But when he saw me, his laughter stopped. He didn't look angry. He looked embarrassed. Embarrassed that I existed. Embarrassed that his mother walked into his fancy home looking like someone who didn't belong. He didn't even greet me properly. He just said, "Oh, Mom, you're here," as if my presence ruined the mood. His wife came up beside him, placing her manicured hand on his arm, her smile tight and forced. She whispered something into his ear, and whatever she said made his jaw tighten. She didn't even look at me directly. She stayed close to her family, her wealthy, polished family, who watched everything like they were judging a performance. I clutched the cake box closer, suddenly aware of how small it looked next to their expensive store-bought pastries displayed on silver stands. I held the gift bag tightly, the little bow now limp from the rain. I tried to offer a smile, but no one smiled back. Instead, his wife's father leaned toward another guest and muttered something that made them both laugh quietly. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew the tone. I knew the look. My son's wife finally walked over, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She gave me the same fake smile she used at the wedding when she wanted to look polite, but didn't want me in any photos. "We were just starting dinner," she said, her voice sweet, but her eyes cold. "And we didn't expect extra guests. Extra guest. Not mother. Not family. Not someone who raised the man they were celebrating. Just an extra guest. An inconvenience." I swallowed my hurt and tried to hand her the cake. She hesitated before touching it, like it might stain her perfect hands. She gave a quick laugh to the other guests and said, "Oh, homemade. How cute." Then she turned and placed it on a side table far away from the main dishes, as if it didn't belong. I scanned the room again. Every chair was taken. They had set the table for exactly the number of people they wanted, none of which included me. My son's wife's mother leaned toward her husband and whispered something that made him shake his head and smirk. I stood there, dripping rain onto their expensive floor, trying not to let the shame swallow me whole. It took only one glance around that room to realize the truth. I wasn't welcome at my own son's birthday celebration. I wasn't meant to be seen. I wasn't meant to be heard. I was meant to quietly drop the gift, say a quick hello, and leave, like a delivery driver. And as I stood there with the storm raging outside and cold judgment inside, I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, but deeply. The kind of crack that comes when a mother realizes her child is no longer her child, but a stranger shaped by someone else's hands. I didn't know then that what happened next would break me even further, nor did I know that the storm outside was kinder than any storm waiting inside that house. I stood there in the living room, trying to blend into the background, holding my bag close to my chest so no one would see how badly my hands were shaking. I kept telling myself, it's okay, they're just surprised, even though every cold stare told me the opposite. I hoped my son would come to me, ask if I was cold, notice the rain dripping from my coat. He didn't. He stayed with his in-laws, laughing nervously, pretending he didn't see me standing alone. As I tried to step closer to him, I heard his wife whisper sharply, "Don't bring her into the photos. She'll ruin the look." My heart tightened, but I pretended I didn't hear. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to embarrass him. I still thought maybe, just maybe, this night could be saved. But then it happened, the moment when everything inside me broke. His in-laws gathered near the dining table, arranging themselves for a big group picture. My son's wife walked up behind him, fixing his collar, smoothing his shirt, acting like the perfect hostess. I stayed back, wiping my wet face quietly, trying to gather my dignity. I wasn't planning to be in the photo, but I still wanted to see my son smile. That's when I heard it. His wife's father asked him, loud enough for everyone but me to hear, "Did you tell her we didn't want her staying long?" My son chuckled, and said, "Yeah, I told her. She'll only stay a minute. I said she shouldn't embarrass us." Embarrass us. My son, my baby boy, the child I raised alone for years, the child I fed, clothed, protected, educated, the child who once held onto my leg and cried when I left for work. That child now stood there in a warm, decorated home, laughing about how I would embarrass him, as if I was something dirty on his shoes. His wife joined in, her voice cutting through the room like ice. "We need classy photos tonight, not that standing in the background. That, not mom, not your mother, just that." Like I was an object ruining her perfect picture. Some guests laughed softly, pretending to hide it. One woman whispered, "I wondered why she showed up, so awkward." Another said, "This is why people should learn their place." Their words sliced across my heart again and again. I stood there frozen, not because of the rain, but because of the realization that hit me so hard it stole my breath. My son wasn't ashamed of the storm outside. He was ashamed of me. I watched him lift his glass and toast with his in-laws like he was one of them, like he had forgotten the life I gave him, the home that raised him, the sacrifices I made without ever complaining. I watched him turn toward his wife's family for approval, not toward me, the woman who gave him life. In that moment, I didn't feel like a mother anymore. I felt like a stranger who wandered into a party by accident. I tried to look away, pretend I didn't hear, but the words kept echoing in my head. He said it so casually, like it was normal, like humiliating me was part of the evening program. Then came the final blow. His wife looked directly at me, finally acknowledging I existed, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I told him to keep her outside until we finish pictures. She doesn't match the theme." The room went quiet. She didn't even bother to lower her voice. She wanted me to hear. She wanted everyone to hear. She wanted to prove she had control, not just of the party, but of my son, of the situation, of how I was treated. My son didn't defend me. He didn't say, "Don't talk to my mother like that." He didn't even look in my direction. He just stood there and let her humiliate me in front of a room full of strangers. Something inside me went numb. Not broken, numb. I felt my throat tighten and my eyes sting, but I refused to let tears fall in that room. I straightened my posture, held the cake tighter, and tried to breathe without shaking. I wasn't supposed to hear those words. They didn't mean for me to hear them. But sometimes God lets you hear what people say about you behind your back, so you finally stop giving them front row seats to your life. The boy I raised was gone. A stranger stood in his place, and I knew then that the storm wasn't outside. It was inside that house. As I stood there listening to my son call me an embarrassment, my mind drifted back to a time when he clung to my skirt and cried if I walked too far from him. He wasn't always this cold. Life wasn't always like this. There was a time when he looked at me with trust, with love, with pride. And in that moment, remembering those years hurt even more than the rain outside. I remembered the tiny apartment where I raised him after his father left. There were nights I worked 2 jobs, coming home past midnight just to leave again at dawn. I used to sit at the kitchen table, counting coins to buy groceries, praying I could give him more. I wore old clothes, patched my shoes, ate leftovers so he could have the new school uniform he wanted so badly. I never let him see how hard it was. I always smiled and told him, "We'll be okay." And somehow, we were. I remembered selling my wedding ring when he needed money for a school trip. I remembered walking to work for a year because the car broke down, and I wanted him to have lunch money. I remembered the day he graduated, when I clapped louder than anyone in the crowd, even though nobody knew I had spent the last month choosing between paying the electric bill and paying his tuition dues. I chose him, always him. But what my son never understood, what I never told him, was that I wasn't doing everything alone. Because behind me, quietly watching over me for years, was my mother. Most people in our town saw her as a sweet, older woman who kept to herself. They didn't know she was one of the wealthiest people in the region. She never flaunted it, never bragged, never dressed like someone with power. She built businesses quietly, invested wisely, and held control over more companies than my son had ever bothered to imagine. And through all those years of struggle, she had offered help many times. But I always said no. I didn't want to raise a child who grew up spoiled or entitled. I wanted him to learn gratitude, kindness, humility, the values my mother raised me with. She respected my decision and stayed silent, stepping in only when I absolutely needed her, always in ways that didn't make me feel small. She paid for a doctor when I fell sick. She bought my son's first car so he could get to college safely. She covered 1 month of rent when I was drowning in bills, but she never gave us more than we needed. She wanted us to stand on our own feet, and I wanted that too. As the years passed, my son grew up thinking we were just an ordinary family. He assumed I stayed simple because I had nothing. He assumed my mother was just another retiree. He assumed his life came from his own effort, not mine, and certainly not hers. He assumed so much and learned so little. He didn't know that when he bought his first house, my mother paid the down payment secretly. He didn't know the business his wife's family bragged about partnered with companies my mother owned. He didn't know that the inheritance waiting for me was enough to buy the entire neighborhood he looked down on me for living in. He didn't know because I kept it quiet, not to hide wealth, but to protect him from becoming the very person he now was. Standing there, listening to him laugh about not embarrassing them, I realized something painful. In trying to protect him from entitlement, I accidentally created it. He thought my simple life made me weak. He thought my modest clothes made me small. He thought my silence meant I had no power. He thought he could push me outside into the rain like a stray dog. He thought he could shame me into leaving quietly. But he forgot the most important truth. A quiet woman is not a powerless woman. And the woman standing behind me, my mother, was the storm they should have feared, not the one outside. As I stood in that warm room full of cold hearts, I remembered the last thing my mother told me before I left for the party. If anyone ever disrespects you, you call me. At the time, I smiled and said I wouldn't need to. Now, I realized I was wrong. They had pushed the wrong woman, and they had forgotten the bloodline they were dealing with. As I stood there in that warm house with the cold people inside it, I began to notice things I hadn't seen before. Maybe I was blind because I loved my son too much. Maybe I refused to see the truth because accepting it would have hurt too much. But after hearing my daughter-in-law complain loudly, something in my vision changed. The fog lifted. Suddenly, every small thing I ignored over the years started making sense. Her voice was sharp and annoyed as she said, "She just ruins the mood when she's here." And my son, he didn't defend me. He didn't even look uncomfortable. He laughed under his breath like it was normal. That was the moment I realized this wasn't sudden cruelty. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. This was wanted. This was who they really were. Their whispers had an ugly tone. I heard his wife say, "My parents came all dressed up. Your mom looks simple. This is embarrassing for us." Someone else added, "Maybe she'll get the hint and stop coming to events." And then the joke came. A cousin of hers said, "If she doesn't leave, just lock her outside until she understands she doesn't belong here." I looked at my son, waiting, hoping for him to say something, anything. But he didn't. He laughed. He laughed at the idea of throwing his own mother outside like trash. My hands went cold long before the storm outside touched me. The truth hit me hard. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a problem, a stain on their perfect picture. My daughter-in-law didn't want me there. She wanted a luxury show, a perfect display for her in-laws, and in her mind, I didn't match their world. I was the scratch on her glass table, the wrinkle in her fancy curtain, something to hide, something to remove. I saw her glare at me every time I stepped near the group. She kept adjusting her dress, touching her hair, looking around like she hoped nobody noticed me. She whispered to her mother non-stop, and every time I glanced her way, they both looked at me with the same expression, annoyance mixed with disgust. It wasn't the first time either. The last few family gatherings had been cold too. I ignored it then. I thought maybe I was imagining it. But now, listening to them talk openly, I saw the truth clearly. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't sudden. This had been building for months. I thought back to the times they planned dinners and forgot to invite me. The times they held parties and said the house was too crowded. The times they came over, grabbed the gift I offered, and left without sitting for even 5 minutes. The times they whispered in the hallway while glancing at me. They weren't just uncomfortable with me, they were annoyed by me, ashamed of me, eager to remove me from their new, fancy life. And the worst part, my son changed with her. He picked up her tone, her attitude, her coldness. He no longer saw the mother who raised him alone, fed him, fought for him. He saw an inconvenience, a nuisance, something that didn't fit his upgraded lifestyle. That night, when they all laughed about me being outside, I knew the truth. They wanted me gone. Not for a minute, not for an hour, but permanently. They wanted a clean family picture, one without me in it. I watched my daughter-in-law walk around the house, fixing pillows, checking her hair in the mirror, giving orders to anyone who moved. She acted like she owned everything, like she built that life with her bare hands, like she was the queen of that house. But she forgot one thing, one very important thing. Power shows itself in silence. And the quiet woman standing in the doorway was far more powerful than the loud girl showing off her diamonds. They all believed pushing me outside was the end of the story. They had no idea it was only the beginning, because while they planned to humiliate me, they didn't expect another person to show up that night. Someone who would change everything. Someone who would not accept their cruelty. Someone who had the power to break their pride in seconds. They didn't know who was coming, but I did. I stood there with the cake in my hands, watching my son walk toward me. For a moment, I let myself hope he would smile, hug me, or at least look at me with the warmth he used to have when he was a little boy. But that hope died the second he opened his mouth. His face was stiff, annoyed, almost embarrassed that I existed. He didn't say, "Mom, you made it." He didn't say, "Thank you for coming." He didn't even say, "Are you okay?" No. He said, "Just step outside for a bit. We're having a private dinner." I looked at him closely, trying to find the child I raised. The boy who held my hand when crossing the street. The boy who cried when he fell off his bike and rested his head on my lap. The boy who promised he'd take care of me someday. But the man standing in front of me wasn't that child. This man was a stranger wearing my son's face. I tried to hand him the cake I spent all morning baking. My hands shook a little, but I held it out anyway. It was his favorite, chocolate with hazelnut cream. He didn't even look at it. He waved it away like it was something dirty. "Mom, just go," he snapped. "Don't make this awkward." The words stabbed me deeper than the storm's cold ever could. Awkward. That's what I was to him now. An embarrassment, a problem, something to hide behind a closed door. I whispered, "Sweetheart, I just wanted to—" But he cut me off sharply. "Please, go outside. You're making them uncomfortable." Them, not him. His wife, her parents, her cousins. Strangers who had known him for a handful of years meant more to him than the woman who carried him, raised him, sacrificed everything for him. I waited for him to realize it, to correct himself, to say, "No, Mom, stay with us." But he didn't. He turned his back to me. I stood there, frozen, not from the storm yet, but from the shock. I tried one last time. "Son, it's raining hard. Let me just sit in the corner if—" He didn't even let me finish. He opened the front door wide, and a blast of wind and rain hit both of us. Then he said the words I will never forget. "You're not part of this tonight." He didn't yell. He didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. He meant every word. I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, not yet, but from heartbreak so deep I thought I wouldn't be able to breathe. My hair blew into my face, my coat soaked instantly, and I still stood there, hoping he would realize what he had just done. He didn't. He shut the door right in my face. That sound, the door closing, was louder than thunder. It echoed inside me. My heart felt like it broke into 1,000 pieces, each one colder than the rain pouring down my back. I stood there in the storm, holding the cake against my chest, watching the lights inside their warm house while I trembled outside like a beggar. I didn't knock. I didn't call his name. I didn't try to go back in. Not because I didn't want to, not because I was weak, but because I realized something very important. If my own son could push me into a storm on his birthday, he had already pushed me out of his life long before that night. I stepped away from the door, each movement slow and painful. My clothes were heavy from the rain, my fingers numb. My tears mixed with the storm water, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. The kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being by yourself, but from realizing the people you love don't love you back anymore. As I stood there shivering, watching the warm glow inside their house, something inside me cracked, and something stronger began to form. A new kind of strength, a new kind of clarity. Because while my son thought he was ending my place in his life, he didn't know the storm wasn't just outside. It was coming inside his house soon, and it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the person he feared more than anyone, my mother. I stood outside in that storm for several minutes, rain hitting my face so hard it felt like tiny stones. My clothes clung to my skin, my fingers turned stiff, and the cake I had held so carefully was now a soggy mess in my hands. I could barely feel my toes. The cold crawled up my legs, into my chest, into my bones. Every second out there felt like a punishment I never earned. Still, I didn't knock. I didn't beg. Because when someone pushes you out physically, it's only a reflection of how long they've been pushing you out emotionally. I walked down the driveway slowly, each step heavier than the last. The wind slapped my wet hair against my face, and water pooled inside my shoes. My breathing grew shallow. I held the ruined cake close to me, not because it mattered anymore, but because it was the last piece of love I brought for my son, and he had tossed me aside without even a glance. My vision blurred, partly from the rain, partly from tears. The storm grew louder, angrier, almost as if nature itself could feel the cruelty that had happened behind that door. I was shaking uncontrollably by the time I reached the street. My hands trembled so hard I could barely reach into my pocket for my phone. My first instinct was to go home, but my home was far, and I was freezing. And deep down, I knew I shouldn't be alone tonight. So I did something I almost never do. I called my mother, a woman of presence, power, wealth, and steel. A woman who intimidates people without raising her voice. A woman my son always tried to impress, but could never fool. As the phone rang, I wondered if I should hide what happened. I didn't want to break her heart the way mine was breaking. But when she picked up, her voice was calm, steady, familiar, and I couldn't hold the pain inside anymore. She didn't ask many questions. She heard the storm behind me. She heard my weak voice. She knew something was wrong the moment I said, "Mom." She simply said, "Stay where you are. Do not move." 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then, through the heavy rain, I saw bright headlights cutting through the darkness. A long black limousine pulled up slowly beside me, its windows tinted, its engine humming low like a warning to anyone who might be watching. The back door opened, and there she was, my mother, stepping out into the storm without an umbrella, without hesitation, without fear. Her coat was expensive, her posture perfect, her face steady. But when she looked at me, soaked, shivering, holding that ruined cake, her entire expression changed. Her eyes sharpened, not with sadness, but with fury. She wrapped her own coat around me without saying a word. Then she looked toward my son's house. Her jaw tightened. Her breath slowed. I could feel the shift in her energy, the same shift I'd seen only a few times growing up. The shift that meant someone was about to regret their choices. Her driver came closer with an umbrella, but she waved it away. She wanted the rain. She wanted the cold. She wanted to feel every piece of anger fueling her. I choked back a sob and said, "Mom." He pushed me outside. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than thunder. She studied the house in the distance, the warm lights, the music, the laughter they shared without me. Then she spoke, her voice low and deadly calm. "Get in the car." I obeyed, trembling as I sat inside the warm leather seat. But she didn't get in with me. She stayed outside, staring at the house like she was calculating something. When she finally sat beside me, she took my frozen hands in hers. And in that moment, I felt safer than I had in years. My mother wasn't just arriving. She was preparing to do what I never could, preparing to show my son and his in-laws what true consequences looked like. That night, in that storm, as I sat wrapped in her coat, one thing became clear. They pushed the wrong woman into the rain because they didn't know who would come to pull her out. They thought they were dealing with just me. But they forgot whose daughter I was. My mother stepped out of the limousine again the moment we reached my son's house. The storm was still raging, but it didn't touch her. She walked through the rain like it parted for her. I stayed inside the car, wrapped in her warm coat, my heart pounding hard in my chest. I didn't know what she planned to do, but the anger in her face told me one thing: nothing would be the same after tonight. Her security team stepped out behind her, 4 men dressed in black, tall, silent, and serious. They looked like they belonged to another world, a world my son's in-laws had only pretended to understand. My mother walked straight to the door and knocked once. One sharp, powerful knock. Not desperate, not polite, just enough to demand attention. Inside, I saw shadows moving. Music stopped, voices lowered. Someone peeked through the window and froze. After a long 10 seconds, the door opened, and my daughter-in-law stood there, holding a champagne glass, her smile wide and fake. The moment she saw who was standing on her doorstep, the glass slipped from her hand and shattered at her feet. Her mother gasped. Her father stumbled back. Even from the car, I could see fear spread across their faces like a wave. My mother didn't even step inside. She simply looked at them the way a judge looks at criminals before a sentence. Then she asked one question in a cold, controlled tone. "Who locked my daughter outside in the storm?" No one answered. My son appeared behind them, pale, confused, struggling to speak. Grandma? What are you doing here?" My mother didn't look at him. She didn't blink. She didn't move her eyes from his wife. Instead, she turned slightly toward her lead security officer and lifted her hand, a simple gesture. Then she gave the order that silenced the whole house. Destroy everything. She didn't yell. She didn't repeat it. She didn't have to. Her team moved instantly, like they had been waiting for it. 2 men walked past my daughter-in-law, ignoring her gasps, and headed straight toward the office where my son kept all his financial documents. Another moved toward the garage. Another took out a tablet and began making calls. I watched from the window of the limousine as panic spread inside the house. My son grabbed her arm. "What is she doing? What is happening?" My mother's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "What you built with arrogance, I built with money. And with one call, I can erase everything you think you own." Her security team didn't lay a hand on anyone. They didn't shout. They didn't break a single piece of furniture. Their job wasn't to smash the house. Their job was to smash his world. Within minutes, every business contract tied to my mother's companies was suspended. Every pending payment they relied on was frozen. Every property connection, loan endorsement, and supply chain link was cut off. Every account they had was being reviewed for misuse. Every privilege they enjoyed through her name disappeared. My daughter-in-law screamed, "You can't do this!" My mother raised one eyebrow. "Watch me." Her parents tried to speak, but my mother silenced them with a single look. I had never seen adults crumble so quickly. My son stepped forward, trembling. "Grandma, please, we didn't mean—" She finally looked at him, and her expression was colder than the storm. "You locked your mother outside," she said slowly. "You will now understand what it feels like to lose the warmth you take for granted." He fell to his knees. His wife backed away, shaking. Her parents whispered frantically, as if they could undo the damage with excuses, but the damage was done. The storm outside stopped, almost like nature paused to watch. And inside that elegant house, filled with people who mocked me, pushed me aside, and called me embarrassing, the real storm began. My mother turned away from them and walked back to the car with steady steps. She didn't look back even once. When she opened the door and sat beside me, her voice softened. "It's over," she said quietly. "Let's go home." And for the first time that night, I felt warm again. As the limousine pulled away from the house, I looked through the rear window. My son stood in the doorway, soaked now, just like I had been. His wife clung to him, shaking, shouting at him, blaming him. Her parents hovered behind them, pale and frantic, whispering fast, waving their hands like people who just watched their world crumble. And in a way, that's exactly what had happened. But the real consequences didn't arrive from my mother's security team. They arrived in the hours after we left. My mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't send threats. She didn't insult anyone. She simply made phone calls, calm, steady, final. When a woman with power moves quietly, the world still hears her. By midnight, the business contracts my son depended on were officially frozen. His job offer from his wife's uncle was withdrawn. His in-laws lost their access to my mother's investment group. And the upscale event venue his wife's family owned was flagged for financial review. That house, the one they thought proved they were above me, suddenly didn't feel safe or secure anymore. It wasn't a home now. It was a structure built on loans they couldn't pay without my mother's connections. Meanwhile, inside the limousine, my mother held my hand gently. "Don't look back," she whispered. "People who push you into storms don't deserve a seat in your sunshine." I listened to her, but part of me still hurt. That was my son, my only child, and I had just watched him fall apart. A piece of me wanted to run back, to comfort him, to hold his face like I did when he was little. But then I remembered the cold door shutting in my face. I remembered the laughter behind it. I remembered standing alone with rain soaking through every layer of my clothing, and the pain in my chest hardened. Later that night, my phone rang. It was my son. He didn't sound angry. He sounded desperate. "Mom, please, please tell Grandma to stop. Please talk to her." Before I could speak, my daughter-in-law snatched the phone. Her voice was sharp, hysterical, trembling between fear and rage. "Fix this. Tell her to undo everything. You're her daughter, aren't you? Control her." For years, she had treated me like I was beneath her. Suddenly, she remembered who I was. My mother sat beside me silently, listening, her face unreadable. I said softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't do this. You did." My daughter-in-law screamed into the phone until she was crying too hard to breathe. The sound didn't move me, not anymore, because I finally understood the truth. She wasn't sorry for what they did to me. She was sorry they lost their money, their status, their security. My son came back on the line, voice breaking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think—" I closed my eyes. For the first time, I heard his real voice, the scared little boy who used to run to me after nightmares. And even though he had hurt me more deeply than anyone else ever had, I still loved him. That love didn't disappear. But love doesn't erase consequences. Love doesn't erase choices. "I asked you for nothing," I said quietly. "Not a house, not money, not respect from strangers. I only ever needed kindness from my own child." He started sobbing, but the damage had been done long before that night, and now the whole world saw who he had become. His in-laws began calling next, one after another. They begged, they threatened, they tried to twist the story. They blamed others, they blamed stress, they blamed a misunderstanding. They blamed the storm, the guests, anything but themselves. Not one of them apologized for locking me outside. Not one acknowledged the cruelty. Not one asked if I was cold, sick, or safe. My mother simply shook her head and took the phone from me. She said one sentence in her calm, deadly tone. "You threw away your own comfort when you threw my daughter out the door." And she hung up. After that, the calls stopped. The next morning, I learned more consequences had fallen. Their credit lines were restricted. Their applications tied to my mother's companies were rejected. Their private event contracts lost funding. And every business partner pulled back in fear of being tied to them. My son finally understood what true loss felt like, not material loss. The loss of respect, the loss of trust, the loss of protection he once took for granted. And as I sat with a warm cup of tea in my mother's quiet home, wrapped in a soft blanket, I felt something surprising, not revenge, not victory, just freedom. The people who pushed me into the storm were finally standing in one of their own. The next morning, sunlight peeked through the curtains of my mother's guest room. It felt strange waking up somewhere warm, quiet, and safe after what happened the night before. My clothes from the storm were already washed and folded on a chair. A tray with tea and warm soup waited on the bedside table. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up to an empty house or cold silence. I woke up in a place where someone cared about me. My mother sat by the window reading the newspaper. She looked up and smiled softly. Not the smile she used when dealing with business partners. Not the sharp smile she used when she needed to intimidate someone. This smile was just for me. Small, gentle, full of love. It made something inside my chest loosen, something that had been tight for years. "Sleep well?" she asked. I nodded. And for the first time since my husband passed, I didn't feel alone. We ate breakfast together, and she talked about simple things, her garden, her neighbors, her charity work. She didn't bring up my son or the chaos she unleashed last night. She didn't want to reopen the wound. She wanted to give me space to breathe, to rest, to rediscover peace. Later that afternoon, my doctor arrived, sent by my mother, of course. He checked my vitals, made sure the storm didn't leave me sick, and gave me medicine for the aches in my legs and chest. He told me I needed warmth, rest, and distance from stress. I didn't argue. My heart had taken enough blows. For the next few days, my mother refused to let me lift a finger. She cooked, she talked to me, she made me laugh. Her house was full of warmth and care, things I had given for so many years but rarely received in return. Meanwhile, the world outside kept moving. My son texted, called, begged, apologized, cried, and tried every possible excuse. He promised change. He blamed his wife. He blamed the in-laws. He blamed the alcohol. He blamed the storm. He blamed anything except the truth, that he pushed his own mother into the rain. But I didn't block him. I didn't yell at him either. I just let the silence between us grow. Sometimes silence teaches harder lessons than anger ever could. His wife? She stopped pretending after the consequences hit. She sent message after message, shifting between fake apologies and furious rage. Some texts said, "Please forgive us." Others said, "You ruined everything." She showed exactly who she was when money wasn't on her side. Her parents kept calling my mother, trying to explain, trying to save their damaged reputation. But my mother didn't care about their stories. She cared about one thing, me. And now that she had seen the truth of how they treated me, she had cut them off permanently. A week passed, and something inside me changed. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped worrying about what my son was doing. I stopped wondering if his wife would ever apologize sincerely. I stopped replaying the storm in my mind. Instead, I started living. My mother insisted I stay with her for as long as I needed. She gave me access to her garden, where I planted flowers in the quiet afternoons. She helped me redesign one of the guest rooms into a craft area where I could sew and paint again, things I once loved but stopped doing when life got too heavy. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something for myself. And eventually, I learned a difficult truth. You can love someone deeply without letting them hurt you again. I didn't cut my son out forever, but I created boundaries, strong ones. He could visit, alone, respectfully, and without excuses. He had to earn his place back in my life, not through money, not through words, but through actions. As for his wife and her family, they never held power over me again. They lost that the moment they pushed me into the storm. Now, when I walk through my mother's home, when I sip tea on her porch, when I hear birds instead of shouting, I understand something important. Family is not built by blood. Family is built by love, loyalty, and respect. My son pushed me out into the storm. My mother pulled me back into the light, and I walked forward with strength I didn't know I still had. In the end, the storm didn't break me. It revealed me, and it revealed them. Sometimes people push you into darkness, so you can finally see who brings you into the warmth. And I'm done standing outside in the rain for anyone who doesn't value me.